want to die? Or should I say, how do you want to live? If you are suffering with a terminal illness that left you in a constant state of pain and agony, vomiting, drooling, unable to control your bodily functions, deteriorating until there was nothing left of you, would you want the right to choose the way you die? I would. I want to tell you about the compassionate answer that's available in the form of physician-assisted suicide and why it should be legal across the United States. I have a personal interest in this topic and have researched the subject and the laws associated with it for some time now. Today I'm going to talk to you about why I believe assisted suicide should be a fundamental right and not a government decision. I will give you information on the suicide rates in the United States and tell you where assisted suicide is actually legal here. I will explain the safeguards and laws required in requests of assisted suicide. If you want the power to decide the way you're going to leave this world when it's your time, then you have a reason to listen to this speech. My interest in this topic came about 3 years ago when I got a call from my neighbor and best friend, Lori. Fighting back tears, Lori told me her father, Frank, had been diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. He moved in with her and her 2 small children and quickly deteriorated in front of their eyes. He went through painful chemo treatments and suffered dementia and paranoia within 3 months. He lost all urinary and bowel control within 4 months. Frank took his last breath 6 months from diagnosis. Frank Cooper was 63 years old. Before he got sick, Frank was a kind, gentle soul, an avid outdoorsman. Hiking, boating, skiing were some of his favorite activities. He spoiled his grandchildren endlessly. In those final months, Frank suffered unbearable pain. He didn't know where he was, who his children were, and violently lashed out at them. Lori described this experience so profoundly when she said she felt as if she had lost him twice. Frank knew he had no chance of survival and that his short future would be filled with pain, depression, and ultimately a dreadful death. Should Frank have had the right to die with dignity and self-worth rather than have the cancer reduce him to a shell of his former self? I believe so. It may surprise you to hear that the age group with the highest rate of suicide in the United States is found in people aged 65 and older. Suicide rates are calculated on a per 100,000 basis, and the suicide rate in people aged 65 and older is 14.3. So to put that in perspective, the national average is 11.3. Now, do you really want to be shocked? The suicide rate in people aged 85 and older is 47 per 100,000. That's more than 4 times the national average. According to a study by doctors at the University of Washington titled Incidence of Suicide in Persons with Cancer, patients with cancer in the U.S. have nearly twice the incidence of suicide than the general population. Physician-assisted suicide has been legal in Oregon since 1997. Oregon was alone in its approval of its Death with Dignity Act for almost 11 years, when in 2008, Washington voters passed the Washington Initiative 1000. In 2009, assisted suicide became legal in Montana through a trial court ruling in the case of Baxter versus Montana. In these states, it's legal for a doctor to prescribe a lethal dose of medication. However, the patient must self-administer the dose. The Oregon Public Health Division is required by the Act to collect information on compliance and issue an annual report. Here is a graph which shows the prescription recipients in the blue versus the deaths reported as a result of ingesting the medication in green. Now, there is a difference in these numbers. In most cases, the medication was not ingested and the patient died of their underlying illness. In very, very few cases, the patient ingested the medication and regained consciousness, but died within hours. Possible medication tolerance or incomplete ingestion were reported in these patients. There are many detailed safeguards and requirements that must be met before the patient is eligible to receive this prescription. In each state, there are nonprofit organizations set up to help the patient navigate the request process. I will give you a simplified version of this process. First, they must be over 18 years old, a legal resident of the state, capable of making decisions on their health care for themselves, and diagnosed with a terminal illness that will lead to death within 6 months. Next, they must make an oral request of their physician, followed by a 15-day waiting period, then a second oral request, and another 15-day waiting period. A written request that's been witnessed by 2 people who are not family members or primary caregivers can then be submitted. They can rescind this request at any time. Within 48 hours of the written request, the patient can pick up their prescribed medication. Once the prescription is received, the patient must be able to self-administer and ingest the medication. They will then experience a peaceful, dignified passing. In closing, while I hope and pray I never find myself or a loved one in a situation such as this, I feel that it is a personal choice and not a government decision. With only 3 of the U.S. states legalizing this humane right, it leaves suffering people in the other 47 states searching for alternatives to relieve their agony and despair. Every citizen of this great country deserves this choice no matter where they reside. You may say, why don't they go to Oregon or Washington or Montana? But in the case of terminal illness, time is of the essence. And by the time residency is established, it may be too late. The unfortunate truth is, if someone truly wants to die, nothing is going to stop them. This law is simply consent to a respectable, non-violent ending to an honorable existence. Thank you. Any questions? Yes?
What do you think has been holding back people from legalizing it in different states?
I think there's a lot of religious and political views. It definitely has been a topic of conversation, but people will question, you know, is it really that person's decision? Are we going to create a situation where, you know, everybody's jumping on this idea? But, you know, I don't think so. I think it's, you know, there are plenty of safeguards and laws that protect that. Yes. Yes.
When, I believe you said Oregon was first?
Yes, Oregon was first.
When
1997.
1997? Okay.
Yep, and then 11 years later, they were surprised that it was such a long time before it was legalized in Washington, which was 2008, and then Montana in 2009, and that was from a court decision of someone that, you know, fought the state. Because this is a state, right now the way that it's set up is the Supreme Court won't make it a constitutional right, but it's determined by each state.
Do you think that more states are going to follow suit?
I mean, I would hope so, but basically, you know, Oregon spearheaded it. It was, you know, 11 years before anybody else got on